Hello, it's great to be back on the show. My name is Mahiza Latifa, and you're tuned into the most compelling news and current affairs talk show tailored to bring you the latest updates from China and across the globe. This is where we take a deep dive into how China works, how it sees itself, and how it engages with the rest of the world. Let's kick things off with China Currents, where Kris is on standby to bring us the most trending stories coming out of China at the moment. Our top stories for this edition: a film based on real historical events during Japan's war of invasion against China has surpassed 1.5 billion yuan at the Chinese box office in just 10 days, reigniting tensions between China and Japan over a long unhealed wound. Also, China has introduced its first ever universal subsidies for children under the age of 3, but many young people remain uncertain about what this means. And a PR disaster for one of China's leading electrical vehicle companies sheds light on the intense competitiveness of the country's booming EV market. This and many more stories are coming your way shortly. Please stay.
Welcome to China Currents, your weekly news report on the latest developments in China. In this episode, a film based on real historical events during Japan's war of invasion against China surpasses 2 billion yuan at the Chinese box office in just 20 days, reigniting tension between China and Japan over an unhealed wound. China has issued its first ever universal subsidies for children under the age of 3, but many young people remain on the fence. A PR Waterloo for one of China's most successful electric vehicle companies reflects the broader reality of China's ultra-competitive EV market. Chinese authorities raise concerns about potential backdoors in NVIDIA's H20 AI chip. Shanghai, like many other Chinese cities, has announced a generous AI support policy to promote AI adoption. China Currents is a weekly news talk show from China to the world. We cover viral news about China every week and also give you the newest updates on China's cutting-edge technologies. Let's get started. I'm Kris. Now let's start today's China Currents. Last week, a film based on real historical events surrounding the Japanese Army's massacre in Nanjing during World War II ignited heated debate between China and Japan. Opponents of the movie, titled Dead to Rights, accuse it of promoting hatred against Japan, while supporters argue it's the first film in decades to provide a fair portrayal of the wartime tragedy. The story is set in Nanjing in 1937, the year the Japanese army invaded and occupied Nanjing. Historically, the Japanese army went on a killing spree after taking control, murdering over 300,000 civilians in just 6 weeks, along with perpetuating widespread atrocities such as arson, rape, and looting. The Japanese soldiers even took photographs of these acts as souvenirs. The not the first movie in China on this topic, Dead to Rights stood out among its peers by grossing over 2 billion yuan at the box office within 20 days of its premiere on July 25th. It has also received high ratings, scoring 8.7 out of 10 on the popular Chinese film review site Douban. And to be honest, the disputes surrounding the movie are an extension of an already sensitive topic between China and Japan. It's not lost on the Chinese people that Japan has euphemized descriptions of the Nanjing massacre and its forced use of comfort women in school textbooks. Some Japanese netizens even outright deny the Nanjing massacre altogether. Far-right Japanese Senator Hiroki Hatsushi Kano even claimed online that the Japanese military is the most gentlemanly army in the world, adhering to the 3 rules of no arson, no rape, no killing. Aside from successfully tapping into the collective memory, the popularity of the movie in China is also attributed to the director's distinctive approach to the topic, in contrast to his predecessors who tend to climax the story with Westerners rescuing Chinese or Japanese invaders having a sudden epiphany of remorse. The director is appreciated by the Chinese audience for presenting a truthful picture of Japan's war crimes against humanity. Next, let's shift focus from history to the present, more specifically to marriage and childbirth in China. On July 30th, China's Ministry of Civil Affairs released 2024 marriage statistics, showing a 20.5% drop in the number of couples registering for marriage compared to the previous year. That's the lowest since 1980. Young people in China are not only reluctant to marry, but also hesitant to have children due to the mounting costs of child rearing. According to netizens, raising a child from birth to university in China costs an average of 680,000 yuan, approximately $95,000. Urban families reportedly spend an additional 2.37 hours per day on child rearing labor. And this is where the Chinese government has decided to step in. On July 28th, China announced a new childcare subsidy plan under which families will receive an annual subsidy of 3,600 yuan per child under the age of 3 starting January 1st, 2025. This subsidy has no restrictions, such as those based on the recipient's household registration location, which is widely welcomed by parents. Renowned scholar Professor Di Dongsheng called it a breakthrough from China's 1,000-year tradition of fiscal conservatism, as the Chinese government has almost never used cash as a stimulus. The subsidies will be funded by both the central and local governments, with a high contribution ratio from the former, up to 95% in underdeveloped Western regions. Next, a PR Waterloo for one of China's most successful electric vehicle companies in an ultra-competitive industry. The recent promotional video for Li Auto's all-electric SUV, the Li Auto i8, has struck a nerve with the public over exaggerated PR campaigns, a common practice in China's cutthroat EV industry. In a video, the Li Auto i8 is shown surviving a series of high-speed collisions with a heavy truck, remaining basically intact after a head-on crash at high speed. Though it's not verified whether the video is fake, the Chinese audience is neither convinced nor impressed. Maybe it's the last straw for them, having been exposed to far too many convoluted, over-the-top advertisements from EV companies trying to stand out in China's fiercely competitive market. And finally, today we turn to developments in China's AI industry. NVIDIA, the US chip giant that only recently resumed exports to China, was summoned by Chinese authorities to explain backdoor safety risks associated with its H20 AI chips, as US lawmakers touted tracking functions of advanced chips exported to China. The meeting between Chinese authorities and NVIDIA took place on July 31st, and no further information has since been made available aside from NVIDIA's official denial. Nonetheless, NVIDIA should know to act quickly, because its Chinese competitors are wasting no time. One of the country's biggest metropolises, Shanghai, has just announced an ambitious 1 billion yuan, about 139 million US dollars, subsidy program for the AI industry in an effort to build a world-class AI ecosystem. In addition, Shanghai is also offering generous compensations for companies that seek to recruit talent in the AI field. But Shanghai is only one of several Chinese cities gearing up to attract AI companies. Take Hangzhou, the birthplace of AI firm DeepSeek, for example. Last year, the Hangzhou government announced 250 million yuan, roughly 35 million US dollars, in cloud computing subsidies as part of its AI industry support policy. The reality is, it won't be long before Chinese companies fill NVIDIA's shoes. And that's all for today. Thank you for watching this episode of China Currents. If you have any thoughts or comments, please leave them below, and see you next time.
Thank you for the updates, Kris. Next on the show is the Thinkers Forum, where our scholars and thought leaders share their brilliant ideas about China and its relations with the rest of the world. Joining us for this edition is Professor Brantly Womack, Professor Emeritus of Foreign Affairs at the University of Virginia Faculty, Senior Fellow at the Miller Center. Reflecting on Trump's current second coming to the global stage, Professor Womack outlines what he sees as three dimensions of global disruption. He argues that Trump's return has reintroduced traumatic uncertainty across nearly every aspect of international affairs, from strategic alliances and global governance to trade and security. For China, this new phase signals both risks and opportunities as the country recalibrates its foreign policy amid growing volatility and unpredictability in the global system.
So if we try to get a big picture on Trump's second term, I would say that it's introduced traumatic uncertainty in every dimension of global affairs. And let's talk about three different dimensions, very broad dimensions. First of all, bilateral relationships. And we've just discussed the bilateral relationship with Vietnam. And it's an extreme case, but the Trump second term is creating serious problems for everyone, including US allies. So that bilateral relationship, everybody is watching the news from Washington to see if what has changed this week and see whether you have the phenomenon of taco, Trump always chickens out of tariff scares, or if the policies return. The second dimension of global affairs that this affects is global order. The United States and Trump's second term don't determine all that's happening in the world. Look at Japan is facing elections, and Korea is facing elections, and the Japanese election might well go more to the right, and the Korean election might well go more toward the left. And besides the domestic effects of that, there will be effects on their bilateral relationship and on their relationship to China and other countries in the region. But these major internal effects are shaped and rendered less certain in their consequences by Trump's second term, by relationships. How does Trump feel about allies in Asia? How is Trump going to deal with allies in Asia? How will it deal with China? All of these questions affect what the moves in domestic politics in the area mean and affect the regional relationships in the area and beyond. So that global order effect is a very significant dimension of Trump's second term consequences. Trump has shaken the web of global relationships. Every country will react differently according to its own situation and standpoint, but every country, as it's acting differently, is affecting every other country. So you have these secondary effects, these ripple effects of Trump's policies. The third is less easy to focus on, but maybe the most important effect of the second Trump term, and that is this is the end of the American century. Now, the American century sounded fairly hollow when President Biden was talking about democracy versus authoritarianism, but now that is out the window even in Washington. So what is to replace it? What sort of modernization, what sort of development continues in the world? Will global values and new forms of relationships, international relationships, and also relationships in domestic politics, will these emerge, or will only chaos exist? Professor Wang Jise has given a list of 5 eternal themes in international relationships: security, wealth, faith, freedom, and justice. And I think that Jise makes a good case for these being eternal themes, but their content and their urgencies change. And we're in a period of great change, of basic change. It doesn't determine what other countries do, but it certainly shakes the framework that they're accustomed to. And I would make a basic distinction between inclusive and exclusive regional architectures. And if we look at exclusive architectures, the comfort of alliances is certainly something. If you feel at risk, you want to have allies. But this shared exposure to risk and the desire to combine strengths against risk creates a situation where you are, in a sense, acting according to having an adversary. You're confirming an adversarial stance in the relationship of you and your new allies to whoever is considered the threat or the target of your alliance. And so you have this relationship that you're creating an alliance that reduces your relationship, your potential positive relationships with your adversary. You're also subordinating your policies to the alliance policy. You're losing autonomy and making your own policy vis-a-vis the country you're feeling at risk. And last thing you're doing, if you're in an alliance and you're not the organizer of the alliance, is that you're subordinating your interest to the alliance leader. So, and getting into alliance might feel like a warm and security enhancing relationship, but it has opportunity cost and autonomy cost to the country that joins. And let me take an example. Look at Finland joining NATO after the Russian invasion of Ukraine. That seems to make a lot of sense for Finland. Finland has this huge long border with Russia. Its relationships to Europe have been not strategic. It has been basically in charge. It's been a neutral country. The term in international relations of Finlandization means to be a neutral country, not a country that's on one side or the other in a relationship that looks adversarial to the rest of the world. So Finland, because of the invasion of Ukraine, Finland joins NATO. And this looks like it might make it more comfortable. But really, if you look at the situation, Finland did quite well in its neutral relationship to Russia. It's a major aspect of Finland's economy. Finland could be sophisticated and nuanced in its relationships to Russia because it was acting alone on the basis of its own interest with Russia, not because, rather than being driven by the Cold War. Now, Finland is part of NATO. Does this mean that it's more secure vis-a-vis Russia? It means that its border is going to be more restricted. It means that if the Russian situation changes, Finland won't be able to adjust immediately to the change. It'll have to relate as a team member in NATO. So it becomes a small voice in a large organization rather than having its own voice, but its own voice alone outside an alliance. So that illustrates the problems I'm describing with the exclusive alliances. Now let's look at AUKUS and the Quadrilateral Security Dialogue, the Quad. And these are semi-alliances. They're not really full alliances. AUKUS is a trilateral security partnership, the UK, Australia, the US. And it ties Australia and the UK into tighter military relationships with the US. I personally don't find it hard to see the useful gain in security for Australia of having nuclear submarines. And I think it loses long-term, even medium-term flexibility in its relationships, not just with China, but also with Southeast Asia, which doesn't like the presence of nuclear weapons in its region. Now, the Quad is less of alliance, less military in its origins, but it's also less of a reality. So it's more a ambiguous discussion forum than it is a real alliance situation. Now, what about inclusive architecture? I think ASEAN, the Association of Southeast Asian Nations, is a model for the world in inclusive architecture. With East Timor joining, it becomes complete in its regional membership. Internally, it has consultation and consensus as its rules, so it doesn't push anyone. It doesn't get very much done at any one moment. It is not a rapid actor. And this is a criticism within ASEAN as well as on the outside. But if it does something, everybody's on board, which is something the EU sometimes has problems with. Externally, ASEAN, the organization of ASEAN, vastly increases the presence of Southeast Asia in Pacific Asia and in global politics. Consider Marco Rubio, Secretary of State Marco Rubio's visit to Malaysia right now. Why is he in Malaysia? Well, he's in Malaysia to show respect for ASEAN, to participate in its post-ministerial conference and its East Asia Summit of Foreign Ministers. It gives him the opportunity to state American positions vis-a-vis ASEAN. It also gives him an opportunity on the sidelines to meet with the foreign ministers of China and Russia, among others. So it's an important visit for Rubio. Is this because of the relationship to Malaysia or the relationship to ASEAN? What would happen? What would this look like if Malaysia were not a part of ASEAN? There would be no visit. If you look at the rest of the US relationships under the second Trump administration to Malaysia, Malaysia just received the word that its new ambassador is going to be a person who has absolutely no qualifications. There are a number of important groups in Malaysia that want to refuse to accredit the ambassador nominated by Trump, though they are cautious about doing that because he's a friend of Trump. And the State Department has just announced a vast reduction in personnel, and a good deal of those personnel are people dealing with the details of relationships with countries like Malaysia. So ASEAN is extremely important, not only internally for its members, but externally for the presence of the region in dealing with the rest of the world. The Shanghai Cooperation Organization is also important. It's an inclusive, consensual organization, but it doesn't have the regional coherence that ASEAN has. And so it's important to its members, but its secondary importance of SCO is that it's not threatening outsiders. That's different from an alliance of any sort. If we compare SCO, Shanghai Cooperation Organization, to the Quad has this ambiguity of, is it a relationship against China? There's no question that the Shanghai Cooperation Organization is not an organization against any other neighbor on the outside. Question of how it relates to the United States is a different kind of question. AUKUS is premised on the real possibility of conflict. That's why people buy nuclear submarines. ASEAN and SCO are premised on common interest, and therefore they reduce the likelihood of conflict. And that's a big difference between inclusive and exclusive regional architectures. Inevitably, the countries are, as they wake up in the morning and read the newspapers or listen to the radio, they're thinking of, how does this affect our interest? And it affects every country's interest differently. And the United States and China are the middle third of the world political economy. Because of that, they're each other's main point of attention. China wakes up in the morning and looks toward the US. US wakes up in the morning and looks toward China. It's easy for the big countries, it's easy for global powers to think that that global relationship is the only important relationship in the world because it is the relationship most important to them. Of course, that US-China relationship is also the major concern of everyone else. But everyone else is not in one camp or the other. We're dealing with a situation of global powers, and everyone has a relationship to the global powers. But these global powers are not hegemonic powers. They're not. In talking about the centrality of China to Pacific Asia, I wasn't talking about a sphere of influence in the hegemonic sense, but a sphere of cooperation. And that sphere of cooperation is inclusive. Does it stop with Pacific Asia? No. China has positive relationships with the rest of the world as well. And the rest of the region has positive relationships with the rest of the world as well. Those relationships, the Pacific Asia region is an inclusive region. But the middle powers are not passive spectators to a boxing match between US and China. Their basic strategic problem, the challenge, is stabilizing the uncertainties of an uncertain world, while at the same time pursuing the opportunities that this world presents. That's not easy. This involves hedging. That means protecting yourself against exposure to risk and accidents. It also involves partnerships. And every country in the world should be proliferating their partnerships, because whatever happens next in the world, that will be happening to countries that one already has relationships with. And to have those relationships be firm and positive means that whatever does happen in the future, one will have friends. Well, I think that final decoupling is quite unlikely because of the nature of the global economy and the nature of global information. We'll see probably continuing effort to the extent that Trump's second administration runs in the direction that it is currently running. You'll see increasing isolation of the United States in the global economy. and also in increasing alienation in global politics. But as the consequences of that isolation start biting into American prosperity and the situation in domestic American outlooks as well as economic effects, I think you'll have a gradual realization of the cost of an isolationist policy for the United States. That it is not possible to make America great again by isolating it and emphasizing exclusive American interest against the rest of the world. And if I'm correct, and if Trump is wrong about this, is open to the future to decide, then the United States will be isolating itself. But its own isolation doesn't change the essential fabric of the rest of the world's economy. And for instance, if the dollar slips as the global reserve currency as a result of this, and various other possible things happen that reduce the kind of clout that the United States has had in global finance, global economy, and global politics, and possibly even global security, then as those effects hit American politics, one of the good things about American politics is that it can change direction. Trump has proved that the change is possible. Let's hope the change continues.
And in the next phase of the Thinkers Forum, we turn to a compelling conversation between renowned economist Jeffrey Sachs and prominent Chinese scholar Zhang Weiwei. Together, they unpack a bold and timely topic: what the West never understands about China. Their dialogue explores the deep-rooted misunderstandings that often shape Western narratives about China, ranging from governance and political philosophy to development models and international behavior. It's a thought-provoking exchange that challenges dominant narratives and invites a deep understanding of China on its own terms. Stay tuned.
This morning, we received a group of American students, 25, to China Institute for a dialogue, which, as you said, will promote the young people dialogue. And I try to describe the difference between Chinese and the American mentality. With regard to foreign policy and security policy, there are clear differences. For the United States, it's friend or foe. Very clear, good or bad, black and white. For Chinese, it's more long-term view. It's a friend or potential friend. You know, behind this, there is a philosophical differences. As a civilizational state, you have much longer vision, even with the troubled relation between China and the Philippines. We know the Philippine politics, it goes ups and downs. This government pro-China, this government against China. So we have patience, despite whatever disputes or even so-called clash. Maximum clash is a kind of firing water cannons, not real shots. Both sides show certain whatever respect for the declaration on the South China Sea. Now, so here's my question concerning the rise of China. It's a different type of, a new type of, you may say, economic, political, and military superpower. And I remember during the time of Enlightenment, the Dutch philosopher Spinoza said something like this. He said, peace is not just simply an absence of war. It's a virtue. Because he's strongly influenced by Chinese culture. And Chinese culture really adores peace, and peace is above all. Even in this famous book by Sun Tzu, Art of War, number one sentence is prudence on waging a war. Yeah. Yet, at the same time, you know, it reminds me of British philosopher Bertrand Russell, who came to China, Beijing and Shanghai, in the year 1920, after the First World War. And China, because of the long experience with European powers, China lost a war again and again with different European powers. So the Chinese intellectuals were very much disappointed with Chinese culture and civilization. Yet Bertrand Russell counseled his counterparts in China. He said, actually, you have a wonderful civilization, especially virtue and passion for peace. And then he made a forecast, which is very accurate. He said, one day, China will have its powerful self-defense capability. So by that time, Chinese passion and virtue of peace will be a tremendous asset for the world. So it reminds me of, whatever, in the United States, the top secret is you cannot say US will become number 2. It must be number 1. In China, at the Chinese government said, we are the second largest, not the largest. Although we look at the official figures from World Bank, IMF, already by the year 2014, 2015, China was the largest economy by purchasing power parity. Yeah. So this is interesting. Huh? Yet, not long ago, US Defense Secretary Sachs said openly in several interviews, he said, we must be very cautious with China because China's hypersonic missile system can sink all US aircraft carriers within 20 minutes. In other words, China has built up a formidable, powerful defense capability. At the same time, we said openly, we'll not be the first to use nuclear weapons, we'll not fire the first shot on whatever occasions. So with this kind of power like China now rising, will that change the whatever power structure in terms of we embrace new world order? So make the Third World War less likely.
Thank you, and thanks for the wonderful references. Of course, in the American political science, the question in international relations is exactly, is there one principle? Do we have it right? Is realism, which is the dominant school in American international relations, a summary for China and for every other place in the world? And I happen to subscribe to your view, which is that the international relations viewpoint that the US has is very particular, and it's very much both a European experience and an Anglo-Saxon British experience. It is not a world theory. And we need to understand and construct a different world theory, actually, that can be understood by all different parts of the world. So, as you know, in realist theory, each nation is a sovereign actor. There is no authority above the individual nation state, and it's a dangerous world. And in the British mentality, it is a Hobbesian world, a world of all against all. And in John Mearsheimer's idea, every country must fight for its survival. And therefore, in a dangerous world, conflict is inevitable. And as John Mearsheimer titled his book, The Tragedy of Great Power Politics, there's an inevitability of tragedy because countries can't solve their problems any other way. And when I say to him, but John, you make war a self-fulfilling prophecy. He says, yes. I said, but there's no reason for this war. Yes, but it will happen anyway. And what I think is true, I give him credit for it, he probably depicts the US mentality. It's not a good theory globally, in my opinion, but he depicts the US mentality. In that book, he has a chapter about China where he dismisses the idea that China has a different viewpoint. I think he's wrong, basically. And I think he's historically wrong and conceptually wrong on this. To my mind, the difference of China and and the Western experience is that China really has been a unified continental scale nation for more than 2,000 years. Maybe you could say 2,246 years since 221 BC. And with there have been periodic breakdowns between dynasties, but basically China's been unified. Europe was nearly unified under the Roman Empire, not fully, because east of the Rhine and north of the Danube, Rome never controlled that part of Europe. But the Roman Empire was very impressive, and it was very large scale, and it was very stable for many centuries, actually. So it was almost 5 centuries of essentially stability. But then it broke down in 476 in the western part of the Roman Empire, and never again was Europe unified, despite many attempts by Charlemagne, by the Holy Roman Empire, by Napoleon, by Hitler. Europe never unified again. There's a big question why, by the way. I think it's a good, deep historical question, though we don't get to run experiments to test it. I think there are 2 parts to this, and the book by E.L. Jones about Europe is quite good on this. First, the physical geography made unification of China more successful, because China is like a box, and in the north is drylands, in the west is the Himalayas, in the south is the rainforest, and in the east is the ocean. And so that box is not so easy to invade except from the north. But you can't invade over the Himalayas. It's very hard to invade from the Pacific side. And the rainforest between China and Southeast Asia is really also a difficult disease barrier and logistical barrier. So China had a geographic unity. Europe is very difficult. There are so many places where you can take power, where you can invade, and so on. So this is one difference. Second, I guess, that the linguistic unity of China played a big role, because China did the impossible, which was to have one written language and dozens of spoken languages. Truly, as an outsider, I don't understand it until today, even though people have tried to explain it to me many times. But still, that unity of language served to unify the political sphere already 2,000 years ago. And language is the biggest divider in the world culture, for sure. If you speak the other language, you're much less likely to go to war. If you speak a different language, war sometimes seems inevitable, because you don't know what they're talking about. And as primitive as that sounds, I think it's a very big deal in Europe. Europe till today is not a unified idea. It is still 27 different countries, each with their own prerogatives, in a semi-unity. And that's why Europe is not a great power, because it's too internally weak and divided, actually, to play the role of a great power. So when it comes to geopolitics, to my mind, this changed a lot. First, internally, Europe did not have China did not have the experience of war other than from the north, other than the wars coming from the steppe regions. And it had hundreds and hundreds of years of peace. So peace is not an idea foreign to China. But in Europe, it was war all the time for 2,000 years almost, or for 1,500 years. Almost no peace. Britain and France fought each other almost every year. And then the other thing is, I believe, but I stand to be corrected, but I think that the Confucian and common culture of East Asia made a big difference. So empirically, we know from 1368, from the beginning of Ming, until 1839, the arrival of the British, China never fought a war with its never launched a war with its eastern neighbors. 500 years. Never invaded Korea. Never invaded Japan. One day, not even once. And had 17 years of war with Vietnam, with the northern part of Vietnam from 1410 to 1427. And other than that, no wars. So how can you make a theory of, if you were a realist theorist for 500 years, you would have no job, no war, complete failure, nothing to describe. So how can we assume it's the same idea, the same mindset? I don't think it is. I think there really is a different mindset, and I think it's true. China never in its entire history went out for an overseas conquest. Never. Whereas Europe did for the last 500 years, and before that, if it could manage, it did that within the Mediterranean region and in the Middle East for 2,000 years. So I think the history is really different, and the mindset is really different. And we need a theory of international relations that also respects those differences and helps people to understand them. When I say this in the United States, they say, oh, that's ridiculous. They can't imagine peace. How could China and Japan never go to war for 1,000 years? Whereas Britain and France were at war, as I said, almost every year. And when the invasions came, it was all from Japan's side to invade China rather than from the Chinese side to invade Japan, other than the two attempts by the Mongol emperor in 1274 and 1281 to invade Japan. But that I don't count as a Chinese invasion. I count that as a Mongol invasion. Other than that, China never attacked Japan. So also I say to my Japanese friends, get over it. You attacked them. They didn't attack you. So stop regarding China as an enemy and stop relying on the US for your defense, because you don't need defense from China. China's not going to invade Japan. It never did. It never will. That's my view.
Thank you. And I just make a very brief comment and then we open the floor. You mentioned this Chinese tradition of preserving peace and stability. It reminds me of the fact today, Munich Security Conference issued a report the year before. It's called a lose-lose. Actually, it's a lose-lose for Europe. If you look at Asia, take China, ASEAN as an example, it's a win-win. 5 decades without war, focusing on development and prosperity. So the sharp contrast. The key difference is China plays a peaceful role, United States plays a warlike role. That's key difference. Yet at the same time, as a modern state, China is very firm. We don't understand why Russia tolerated NATO expansion, 5 expansions. China said even not once NATO can expand to Asia. Forbidden. So this is very important.
And that brings us to the end of today's edition of China Now. From trending headlines in China currents to deep reflections in the Thinkers Forum, we hope today's conversations have given you fresh insights into China's evolving place in the world and the complex dynamics shaping our global future. Thank you so much for joining us. My name is Makiza Latifa, and it's been a pleasure guiding you through the stories and ideas that matter. Until next time, stay informed and let China not be far away from you anymore. See you soon.